Well, here at the Aussie Wire, we're continuing to follow the unfolding story of vaccine injuries. And yes, I can actually say that now and not get immediately cancelled and lose the channel, because it has been officially acknowledged in Australia and around the world that vaccine injuries from the COVID-19 vaccines do actually exist, including deaths, by the way. All of that's now official public knowledge, where once upon a time, not so long ago, it was a conspiracy theory. Well, sadly, and I'm sorry to say this, there are some other conspiracy theories that look like they might just be coming true. And a new report has come out looking at CDC data that paints a very concerning picture. Here to help me unpack it is Paul Oosterhuis. Now, Paul, can I call you a doctor without getting kicked off the internet? Am I going to get into legal trouble if I give you that title?
I got the degree. I've got the letters after my name, so
All right.
that shouldn't change.
I just have to be careful these days, because once people get suspended by ARPA, and then suddenly I can get in trouble for using their title, and it's a crazy mad world we live in.
It is. I am retired, but I'm, as you know, a former anaesthetist for 32 years.
Yeah. Well, 32 years is plenty long enough. I've no doubt you've read many a medical report in your time, and that's what we're here today to discuss. This is a report, a study that is looking into CDC data. We're going to have to walk through this kind of methodically, Paul, because, well, I look at this stuff a fair bit, and yet I still have to sort of pace myself and make sure I'm really understanding what I'm looking at. So I appreciate you joining me here today to help unpack this, because this really is a bombshell. It paints a very, very concerning picture. This is the US death trends for neoplasms, ICD codes C00 to D48, ages 15 to 44. What, in English, what are we looking at here, Paul?
Well, Dr. Wiseman, Allegri, and Eunice did this paper on ResearchGate, published it on ResearchGate, which, as you say, looks at the excess mortality figures. It's American data, American CDC data, and what they've teased up is the American data for ages 15 to 44 and the excess mortality. And they look at underlying cause and deaths that are coded with multiple causes.
Now, this is the ICD codes part of it, the C00 to D48. Essentially, what they're looking at here is cancer deaths in people between ages 15 to 44, as I understand it, Paul.
That's right. And it comes on the tail of UK data that was published for the same age groups, 15 to 44, by Edward Dowd's group at Finance Analytics, which similarly shows a very concerning picture.
Very concerning trends. And so we're going to walk our way through 4 graphs, each of them getting slightly more complex and slightly more convoluted, just to make sure that we all kind of understand and wrap our heads around what we're looking at here. This is the USA CDC, so the Center for Disease Control. This is authoritative data. The underlying cause is all, and the yearly deaths per 100,000 people for all causes, it is for male and female, and the age group 15 to 44. So help us to understand the deaths per 100,000. Why do they map it that way?
Well, the way it standardizes for changes in population size.
Right.
So they express it as a rate. But even though they're doing that, you can see there's a gradual trend upwards. And it's been reported that the life expectancy in the US has been falling, and
wow,
you can sort of see it here.
So next time they say, do you want fries with that? Maybe consider saying no. That would be my advice to Americans. But even with that rising trend, we can see the last 3 years of data, which is 2020, 21, and 22. That is an extraordinary jump, an extraordinary anomaly there, which to the naked eye would demand that questions be asked and answered. But as we drill down deeper and get a little bit more specific, now, this is a excess death rate. Now, this is the same data, but instead of being mapped against per 100,000 people, as this one is, this is now excess deaths. What's this concept of excess deaths, Paul?
Well, people die all the time. People are born all the time. But, and from year to year, you will have a certain expectation based on the previous year and the year before that. And this is how the life insurance industry works, because it's actually quite predictable from year to year. And this is what allows them to make their charts. So if you see a number that goes beyond what is expected, what breaks the trend, these are called excess deaths.
So what we can see here in the data from 2010 to 2019 is that the variation typically stays, or actually always through that period, stayed below 5%, typically 4% or even a lot less in either direction. So it just is fluctuating there. Now, Paul, I don't know, has it caught your eye that those last 3 years are a little bit different? What did we start doing in 2020 that was maybe different to what we were doing before? Do you have any ideas?
Well, we did have a few policies that came in 2020. They were called COVID policies.
That's right. I do remember that, actually. That just vaguely, it just rings a bell for me. So now that we've understood there is clearly a signal here, we're talking near 35% excess deaths within the 15 to 44 age group. Now, before anyone jumps in and goes, oh, that was probably COVID, let's remember that the 15 to 44 age group was at very, very low risk from COVID. So I don't believe that this can be explained by COVID itself, can it, Paul?
No. And people have floated many different causes, lack of medical care, climate change, a lot of ridiculous things, actually. But of course, the concerning thing in the US, fentanyl overdoses, suicide, which, but certainly these figures are too high to be explained by those. They are a factor, but they don't explain such a large jump.
Yeah, I could certainly believe that locking people in their homes and destroying livelihoods, etc., would have led to a cause of whether it's suicide or death through substance abuse or these sorts of things. I could certainly believe there'd be a signal there, but not of this magnitude and continuing all the way into 2022. That doesn't seem a reasonable hypothesis. Now, this is a similar graph here, but there's now a red here, which is the UC deaths per 100,000 for COO and to D48. What are they separating out here in the data, Paul?
Well, sometimes there are underlying cause on the death certificates as the main cause, and sometimes they will code it with multiple causes so that it's more one of a contributing set of factors. Underlying causes is where this was the main cause.
Yeah. So which one have they separated out here in red?
These are the excess deaths per 100,000 of this code.
C00 to D48,
so
which, as I understand
so
it...
these are the 50...
Sorry?
Carry on.
So these are, as I understand it, these are the cancer codes. So if someone dies, the underlying cause is considered to be any one of a variety of different cancers. They have a number of different codes that they would then apply, and that's what this study is looking into. It's isolating the cancer. Now, I can't help but notice, Paul, the overall all-cause mortality in blue has kind of peaked in 2021 and then dropped in 2022. Still extremely high, but at least not a new high. The cancer rates seem to be defying that trend, though.
Yes, it's quite worrying. You can see it increases year on year from 2020 to 2021, and then again from 2021 to 2022.
Yeah.
And they have extraordinary, they're quite extraordinary in
as a ratio. So this is the final graph here, and the reason I wanted to walk to this graph fairly slowly, and we're going through this quite methodically, is because this graph is on its own misleading, but it is still important. Now, this is not a graph that is mapped against absolute numbers. This is mapped against a Z-score or an order of magnitude. Can you help us to understand what's the purpose of a graph like this? What is this trying to help us understand?
Yes, well, it's comparing it to itself. So these are standard deviations or variance, as you say, in the Z-scores. And again, you're seeing an increase in this group where as neoplasms, which is cancer, as an underlying cause in young people, has just taken off.
It's quite extraordinary. Now, it's important to point out the red and the blue in this graph are not to scale with each other. In this graph, they're to scale with each other. In this graph, as you rightly point out, Paul, they're to scale with themselves. What do we mean by that? Well, if we jump back to this graph here, have a look at 2010 to 2019, there is a level of deviation that is quite normal within that graph, and that could be called a standard deviation. I'm massively, grossly oversimplifying here, but imagine that as a standard deviation. And so when we jump to this graph, A 1 on this graph would simply be a normal rate of variation on this graph. What we have here in red, the cancer excess mortality in 2022 was 16 standard deviations, or again, I'm butchering it, but 16 times what you would expect the maximum normal variation to be. As I understand it, Paul, this is essentially a black swan event. Have you seen data like this from any other causes in the past in your 32 years of practicing medicine?
No, I don't recall ever seeing data like this. It's not just cancers. There are 720 things that the proportional reporting ratios triggered a signal of concern, which is greater than 2.
Yeah.
And so when you're seeing figures of 16, it's extraordinary. It truly is a black swan.
What particularly concerns me about this, and it's not a happy story, I don't enjoy covering this sort of thing, but the blue line there obviously is devastating for everyone that's been affected by those deaths from 2020 to 2022, but we can see that it's kind of following the number of jabs being given, if I can hypothesize as to what a potential contributing factor might be. As the number of jabs drop away, the number of people affected are going to drop away. That's not what we're seeing with the cancers, though. That, to me, is a very concerning signal that perhaps the negative effects might be longer term than just that immediate sort of temporal risk. Now, Paul, are you aware of anyone who is talking about or has, if someone, there'd be lots of people watching that for reasons of their own ended up taking these jabs, where they were coerced or perhaps they thought it was a good idea. They were lied to and they thought, hey, this is the right thing to do. There's any one of a number of reasons why people might have. And they're looking at this data and they understand the implications and they're sitting there going, oh, crap. What do we know so far? This is obviously a developing area, but what do we know so far that these people could do to reduce the potential for a long-term impact in their lives?
Well, there was a wonderful monograph done, published on the medical evidence tab in the FLCC, that's the Frontline COVID Critical Care Alliance, by Dr. Paul Merrick. He did an extensive review. And there are multiple things you could do, particularly diet, intermittent fasting. He talks a lot about ketogenesis. Originally, it was proposed in the setting of the treatment of vaccine injury, but there are also multiple herbal, everything from medicinal mushrooms, green tea extract. There were 2 generic drugs on that list, but only 2 out of, say, 23, the top 23, which included antiparasitic fenbendazole, ivermectin is on that list. But like I say, there's a lot of natural things there too. But you know, the obvious normal things that we would think of, weight loss, healthy diet, exercise, vitamin D. Vitamin D, which is one of the things that I talked about quite a bit in the context of COVID. It's a very important vitamin or modulator for optimal functioning of the immune system. And I was listening to Dr. William Mackis, the Canadian oncologist, just yesterday. He did a report for Doctors for COVID Ethics. He's seeing the same signal in Canada, and he's been reporting it on his Substack. And he talks about it in terms of the underlying cause is immune dysregulation or damage to the immune system. In my own family, my ex-wife unfortunately got the shot against my advice and developed shingles, which is often a sign of impaired immunity. And then developed the B-cell lymphoma. And needed chemotherapy. So this is very close to home for me. So the final common pathway seems to be damage to the way the immune system is functioning. And we have I've written about it on my Substack over the last 2 years. There are many factors because cancer immunity and immune surveillance is complex, but it includes things like interferon, which appear to be affected. And more recently, we've become concerned at the discovery of contaminants of DNA. Uh, uh, and we also know the spike protein is capable of binding to important regulatory genes for DNA repair. And it's when this DNA repair, this is BRCA and P53, which is called the guardian of the genome. So things that impair the normal functioning of the DNA repair and the functioning of the immune system then allow these cancers, which appear in our bodies all the time, but the immune system normally will find it and say, this is not normal, and take it out. If they've been diverted, if the resources have been diverted elsewhere, then that leaves these to develop. And the concern is that we're seeing more aggressive tumors. Dr. Marcus was talking about these, what they've been calling turbo cancers, where previously oncologists would see a certain grade of tumor and they're not behaving, they're behaving more aggressively. He said that they're seeing, particularly in the people who've had the mRNA vaccines, that they're seeing cancers in younger people, which is why this is so important. Cancers that we didn't previously see, breast cancer, aggressive breast cancer, bowel cancer, lung cancer, and when they present at a later stage and don't respond as well to treatment.
And tragically, that's where this data comes from. This is in graphic form a human tragedy that appears to be unfolding at this point in time. Well, Dr. Paul, thank you so much for bringing this unfortunately fairly heavy story. This is not a story that I enjoy covering. I know it's not something that you enjoy seeing. I'd be very grateful if you'd send a few of those links that you've just mentioned to places where people can find some resources. We'll put those into the show notes so that those who do wish to perhaps take some steps to reduce their risks or perhaps help themselves in some way have those resources to find. Dr. Paul Oosterhuis, thank you so much for joining us.